Hey folks, welcome back to the shop. It's been a while, I understand. Happy New Year. Today is the 2nd. Took some time off, a little vacation, things like that. But we're going to be back into it. Hopefully this year we're going to see some new and interesting things. I'm going to try and change stuff up on top of my normal disassembly videos. I'm going to try and do some projects. I've got some project guns I need to get finished, and we're going to do that hopefully. But in the meantime, we have another takedown video for you. It is a Ruger GP100. This particular one is a .357 Magnum. It is a 6-inch barrel. These guns were built originally to replace the Ruger Single 6, which was one of the early Ruger double action pistols. It was a medium frame compared to the Red Hawk or Super Red Hawk, which are a little bit larger frames. This gun does share some of those characteristics, kind of like the way the crane locks up here and things like that. Excellent guns, extremely strong. Rarely have an issue with them. When you do, very easy to overcome. This customer came in. I did like a little bit of polishing, a little internal action job on this thing, and replaced some springs like that. And took the double action trigger pull from a hefty 14 pounds, like 13 and a half, 14 pounds. I think it averages somewhere about 8.5, 9 now. The single action pull went from 6.5, 7 pounds. Believe it or not, it was actually about 5 or 6, 5 or 6 pounds on a single action pull to right about 3 pounds now. It's much smoother, feels a lot better, but I'm going to go ahead and disassemble it, and we're going to go through it. One of the things that we're going to look at here first, the sights, they come off pretty traditionally. It's just a screw here, and then on the side of it there's a pin. Knock that out, some springs underneath. I'm not going to take this off. I don't want to dick with the current sight alignment that they have. But on the front of it here, there's a pin. You can see there, that pin, that just pushes in, and when you push in on that, you just lift up on the back side of the sight, and it comes right out of that dovetail. See it there? It's like that. So the front sights are really easy to take out and exchange for whatever you might want. We'll leave that little guy in there for now. I just don't want it going launching across the shop. The next thing that we're going to do is pull the grips off. Let's see here. We'll adjust this up just a little bit, I think. Don't need to be quite that close. Yeah, we'll pull the grips off here. Screw comes out. Now, before you take these grip panels off, they do have to come off. You can flex it just a little bit. Just turn the butt there, flex it a little bit. Pull the right side off first, set that aside, and then pull your left side off here. And the reason is inside here is this little pin inside the grips there. Well, that little pin is a takedown tool that Ruger provides for you. We'll set that right there for now. You need to push this big steel pin here out, and that is what locks this rubber grip in. Pull that off there, and we'll set that aside. Now, what you need to do is cock the hammer, and then you take your little pin and you stick it in that hole right there, just like that. And all I do is I'll just turn it up like this and fire the gun. And what it does is it captures that spring in your little holder here. Just compress this and pull the pin out, and the spring and everything else will come over, and this retention plate. This is a little bit lighter weight spring than what came in the factory, which adds to a lot of reduction in pull weight. Another thing you can go into and do on these here, on this main spring, or this hammer strut I should say, is all of these sharp surfaces, just a big piece of stamped steel. On these surfaces you can actually polish just a little bit and knock all these real sharp edges off of the corners. And I don't know if you can see that or not, But I've taken all the real sharp edges off of there and then went through on the buffing wheel and just kind of buffed this over. Same thing, all these little sharp edges here. And then on this piece here, on the very bottom, you can see all the weird marks on there from it being stamped, because it is just a stamped steel part. But you polish all those sharp edges, all these sharp corners off, and run it over a buffer. I just run some angles on it with a real fine set of files, and then take it to the buffer and polish all those little surfaces off, and that allows things to ride much smoother. The spring doesn't catch and grind on any of those sharp corners, and same thing here where this interface is inside of the hammer. It'll ride much smoother, and it makes for a much smoother trigger pull. From here, this pin here in this little tab just pushes right out like so. And get your hammer. What you have to do is you have to pull the trigger, and then the hammer will pull out just like that. You can knock this pin out. It's pretty easy. That's your double action little foot paw thing there. There's really no reason to go through and try and stone on any of these sear surfaces. If you actually just dry fire this gun a whole bunch, they smooth out really, really nice. Most Rugers do. Actually, most any gun. Just dry firing will smooth them out. So if you got one new, it feels a little bit gritty, man, just dry fire the crap out of it. You'll be amazed how it cleans up. There's a little spring back there. Keeping that there. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take a punch, and if you'll see right in there, that little detent, we need to push it in. Let's see if I can do this out here. Push it in and down. Like that. And then pull your trigger group out. Set that there. We'll open our cylinder, and it will just slide out. Outside of that, obviously we've got the rear sight, but like I said, I'm not going to take that off and dick with that. I don't want to mess with the sight alignment there. This front, it'll dovetail back in here pretty tight the way it was, so we don't have to worry about that. Is your cylinder release here, this little button, is just held in by a screw at the very bottom here, but typically these things are staked in so they don't work out, you know, because it's hanging out in the bottom there. And you're probably going to damage a screw if you try and pull that out, so only mess with that if you actually have to replace something in there or fix something. There's a little spring obviously in there, and a detent. You can see it, it's actually inside the release there, and that's really all there is to these frames. It may not make that big of a difference or whatever just because of the way it fits in here, but you can see they kind of slacken off on this gun anyways, that there's a lot of flashing here, and that's from the machining processes that Ruger does on these, and I'm really surprised that they don't go in and clean all that stuff up, because that stuff can break off like just during operation of the gun and go wandering around inside of here and cause all kinds of problems. It's odd that they didn't fix that. Your firing pin is held in there. It's springed, and I believe there's a pin up underneath here that holds that in. I don't really remember. I don't take these firing pins out unless they're broken. So that's really all there is to the frame. The next thing that we're going to go to here, and this is where things are going to get a little funky. Pull up on the trigger a little bit, and your transfer bar will come out. You can also take next, what needs to come out is this little pin here that holds in. This is the detent pin that held into the frame there to hold your trigger group in. And what I'll do is actually, I'm going to turn it over this way. It comes out easier this way here. Just set it on a block and take your punch and just tap it out. You got that little pin there. And you can hold that in with your thumb, pull your punch out, and then that plunger will come out. You have a spring in here. This is your trigger return spring. This is also a reduced power that we've put in here. And behind that, there is another little detent guide. It doesn't want to come out. It's playing hard to get right now. That's okay. We'll get it out here in a minute. To pull the trigger out here, you just push that little pin. Go through. There's your pin. Don't lose that. Put your finger over the top here because there's a piece in there that is sprung. And now your trigger comes out of your trigger guard. And you have your pawl. And this is what actually pushes up on the cylinder and makes it rotate. You also have this little leg here. This is what interacts with that little plunger there, the return spring. It's staked in, or rather its pin is staked in, so don't worry about pulling that out. There's just no need to, unless it's broken. You got to replace it. This just slides off, but put your finger over there. There is a little detent and plunger there, or spring. And let's see here. We're going to have to push that guy back. There we go. That comes out. And then you got this little guy here. And that comes out. And that's really all there is to the trigger itself. Let's see if we can get that little plunger out here now, I think. There we go. And there's the other side of that little plunger for the spring. So the spring rides on it here and here. Pretty simple concept. This little guy here, this little detent here, that's staked in. That's actually what retains the grain here when it's inside the gun, so don't worry about taking that guy out. This is your cylinder stop here, and it does just wiggle off, but again there's a plunger and a spring under there, so make sure your finger's over that so it doesn't go launching. Pull that plunger and spring out, and that's all there is to your trigger group. This here, this gets a little tricky. This sometimes takes a couple of hands, but what you have to do is there's a little detent plunger in there that you've got to take and push in with a pin here, and then you've got to take another punch and push out there on that pin. And it didn't want to go. Yeah, this thing's a bitch. Why you no cooperate? There we go. Yeah, I just need a little more provocation. That little guy there, when you pull that out, your yoke lock is going to come out, a little piece there, and keep in mind, see this little, your ejector rod will come out, and there is a detent and spring inside behind here as well, so be conscious of that you don't lose that little guy. And now there's a couple of little detent balls here, and it's going to be a little stiff until you get out of there. This is really as far as I recommend you take this cylinder apart. There's a special tool that's required to go inside of here, and you can see that little kind of a flathead slotted screw. Well, it's a two-piece, or not a two-piece rather, but a forks tool, so that this little rod goes inside the tool itself, and you unscrew that, They're typically in there pretty tight. I've broken both of my bits that are used for that. I keep having to replace them, and it's kind of a big old pain in the ass. So, often Shmoo gets inside of that little galley where those, where these little detent balls ride, and that's what keeps this yoke inside of the cylinder there. So as this slides inside of there, those two little detent balls poke out. If this thing was properly clean or whatever, it would probably smooth the action up that much better, because this factory grease it just turns into crap after a while, and it's pretty useless. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna go back in while we're doing this, and I'm gonna take some Q-tips and I'm gonna swab that out, and then I'm gonna re-grease it with some new lithium stuff, or calcium grease is what I've got here actually. But I'm gonna wipe all the carbon and all that bullshit that's in there. I mean, you see that? Just nasty. But if we can get that cleaned out there, and then I'll go ahead and I'll put a little bit of calcium grease back in there, and not a lot. You don't want it to get all gunky like this again. Yeah, we'll be right there, I think. So I'm just going to take some of this calcium grease, wipe it on there. Looks like a zit being popped, doesn't it? Shit's gross. But we're going to go ahead and see if we can't get in there and smear that around. That ought to be good enough. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a little bit inside of here on that hammer pin too. And you can pretty much put, you know, this little bit of grease on just about any part here you want. Where was I looking for that? On the trigger, I'm going to put a dab in here for our transfer bar. That's the word I'm looking for. Fucking lost my damn mind. Probably put a little bit in here too for the pawl. And maybe a little bit here for this pivot pin. And what we'll do is we're actually going to go ahead and put all this back together. So I'm going to stick that back in here. This is all just, you know, obviously reverse of what we just did. Need to put our little spring and detent back in there. And if you want, you can take this guy, when we put it back in, we'll wipe a little bit of grease on it too. But we'll stick that back in there. And then our ejector rod. Yeah, almost goofed up there. This little short galley in here has to face up like that. That's what that other little weird little pin rode in. And when you put this back in, this is the orientation you need it to be in. So this little bulb end, this little part, this little divot right here is what that detent rides in. So I'm going to shoot a little grease in there. New grease. Not that it's really necessary, but I'm going to do it anyways. Now, when you go to put this back in, put your pin in here and kind of start to align things here. But you have to go back and you have to push that detent back in down here to get that pin in. So you kind of have to play and try and align all this and push that detent and that pin in so that it goes all the way back in, and now you should have a good everything set up there. Yeah, that spins. It feels a lot better. I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna wipe a little bit of that grease here. Don't need a ton of it, but I'm gonna wipe some in there just to get it all on these moving parts. This thing really does just need to go through the sonic cleaner, but the customer didn't really pay for that, so we're not going to dick with it. I'm sure if I called him and said, hey, we probably need to do this, he'd say, yeah, but it ain't that bad. And we could set that aside for now. And what we'll do is we'll pick up our little detent here, slide it back in its little hole, and our cylinder stop will go in like that. You just take a punch, push your little detent and spring in, and it'll catch just like that. And then from there, what we need to do, let's see, I wonder, I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of grease down in here as well, just so that that plunger can ride back and forth nice and smooth. I'll stick that plunger down in here just for now. We need to take our little piece here. The orientation of this is that it goes in like so. Stick it in there, and you take your detent and spring, and we'll put it on this side. Get it kind of locked in place there. And we'll take our paw, hand, whatever you want to call that guy. Push your detent in, and we'll slide that over just like so. Make sure it works nice and good. And then we can take and put the transfer bar back in right now too if you wanted to. And we'll put the trigger back in. We'll put it back in here. And make sure that you get that little nub, that little bar there. Put your trigger in and get it down in that hole right there, where things are just not going to work out very well for you. And then we'll get these holes lined up. Take our pin here. We'll start it through. Wiggle that. And you can take a punch if it needs to and help line up all this stuff. There we go. Gosh, damn it. I don't know why you're not cooperating right now. Come on, little pin. There we go. Make sure our pin's in there. Now, let's see. Nope, before I go messing with that, put our spring back in there, like so. We'll take our other little plunger and stick it in there, like so. Our block, our little pin. Stick our pin on there. And it should go in pretty easy. Make sure that all moves around like it should. Alright. take our cylinder and we'll stick that back in here like so, and just go ahead and let it close and lock up for the rest of this. You're gonna have to wiggle the transfer bar and your pawl around a little bit, but this little piece here catches inside the frame right there. When you put it back up inside like that, and make sure that it's all pretty well free and out of the way, and we'll take our little punch and push that little detent there back in. Oh, it's pretty stout, it's going to want to walk back out, but let's see, what are we getting in the way? This is kind of a pain in the ass process. So, is it that? No. Is it our hand? Nope. Is it fucking trigger? So let's see here. Trigger pin not sitting flat or something? What a pain in the dick. There we go. And oh, there we go. Let's fucking, there we go. And you need to, that gap you shouldn't really see that, so just give it a little bit of a smack and it'll go right back in there, pretty seamless. And then now we'll put the hammer back in, and just like before, when you put the hammer in, you have to pull the trigger all the way to the rear and slide it down from the top, and then take your pin and slide it in from underneath, lining the holes up, and it should just sit in there like so. The grips is what retains that little guy and keeps it from walking out. Wipe the extra grease off of that guy there, and then we'll take our mainspring and hammer strut, and it fits in there like that. And just in case you're confused too, if you do take this spring off, that is the orientation that needs to go back together, so you have an idea there. That always gets me every time I mess with one of these things. I always screw up that orientation. Let's stick it back in this little recess. Actually, what I'm going to do too is I'm going to dab some grease on this, since it rolls in there like that. That little part right there, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of lubrication inside of there. And stick it there. And that little plate sits on those two nubs. Cock your hammer. Don't lose your pin. There we go. And from there, all we need to do, slide our grip back on. It should go on pretty easy. Your big aluminum pin there, and stick it in. Little grips. And we're going to take our disassembly pin, put it back in the grips there. Take that panel and put it on. Turn it over. That panel where? That. Sometimes I think it's easier just to run these bits by hand instead of trying to turn that whole screwdriver. There's a lot of threads on these grip screws. And once it gets pretty close to tight, somebody has over tightened this once before. You really just need to get it snug. Don't crank down on it, because what happens is you crack this grip panel and the screw sticks way the hell out, and it's weird holding on to. And the next thing, we're going to come up here and we're going to move that back, put our front sight back in, just like so, and it stays in there nice and tight. That's it, man. That's all there is to the GP100s. They're really, really simple guns. They're very strong, very reliable, very accurate. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully I'll make another video here pretty soon about the upcoming projects that I want to do and have done. I've got a lot of guns I think we're going to do some cool stuff. I'll even go into some of the, I guess, more custom stuff and things like that this year, and hopefully we'll keep this channel up and going and doing this stuff. I have a lot of fun doing these things for you guys. Mostly for me. I just enjoy doing this stuff. If you guys got any questions, comments, leave them down there in the bottom. As always, like, share, subscribe, and thank you for watching.